The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Automating AIX and IBM iAdmin task with Ansible Content. Thank you for joining. We are going to give people just another minute to hop on, and then we will kick things off. Alrighty, I will go over a few little details before I hand it over. First of all, this webinar is going to be recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording as well as the slides. There are also going to be some poll questions that I can launch here. So if you want to go ahead and vote, I will be launching those as well. And then the last piece is that there is going to be a short Q&A at the end of the webinar. So please drop any questions you have into the Q&A box, and those will be addressed at the end. And if you have anything else that you need during the webinar, any audio, please drop it in the Q&A. Thank you. And then, Joe, I'm going to launch the rest of these before you start off the webinar.
Okay, great. Should we go ahead and get started?
Yes, I am just launching these polls quickly, so I'm giving everyone about 30 seconds just to select their answer, and then we can get going.
All right, sounds great. Just as a data point, the poll did seem to take over the screen, so we can't see the presentation material anymore. At least I can't.
Correct, yeah. So I'm just giving everyone 30 seconds to answer each one here before we get the actual presentation started. So I've got 2 more to launch after this one. Great. All right. All those polls have been taken now. Joe, I will hand it over to you.
Hey, thank you so much. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon. So happy to be here with you all today. My name is Joe Cropper from the IBM Power Systems Software Development Organization, and I'm joined by my colleague, Paul Finley, who's also in the development organization. And today we're here to talk about a topic that's been coming up and been getting a lot of momentum out in the field, and I think a lot of great industry excitement, and that's all around automating AIX and IBM administrative tasks using Red Hat Ansible. And so again, a really exciting set of discussion points here today. And again, just a big thanks for everybody taking the few moments up front to answer some of those questions for us. So it'll sort of help us, position sort of where we take some of this stuff going forward. So thank you for that. Next slide, please, Paul. So just in terms of the content, what we want to sort of cover here in today's session, for those of you that may be new to Power Systems, we're going to take a quick moment to give you a quick crash course in Power 101, just to sort of help paint the picture of what these computers are used for. Then we're going to sort of talk about some of the common administration challenges that we hear, in terms of working with our clients, and sort of what we're hearing based on the feedback, and really how we're so excited to be partnering with Red Hat and around the Ansible platform, and bring this new level of automation to our Power Systems customers. So we're going to look at some of those examples. We're going to look at sort of the deployment architecture. And then Paul's also going to take us through a lot of the key use cases and the modules that have been enabled for the operating systems, and then even show a couple of really cool demos. So I think we got an action-packed session here to take you all through today. Next slide. So for those of you that may be new to the Power platform, sometimes when we talk with folks, people are always surprised to hear it's another compute architecture. So it's the Power PC compute architecture. Sometimes might have heard of Power PC. And in fact, it's typically you would find these inside of the Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 companies. These systems are known for their strength and resiliency and reliability. What's really interesting about Power Systems is you can find them in all sorts of different form factors. I mean, everything from a one socket 2U box all the way up to a 16 socket 4U that can have up to 192 cores and 64 terabytes of memory. So they come in a very broad range of again, form factors. From a workload perspective, these things are typically running customers' most mission critical workloads. So data intensive applications, systems of record. Chances are if you're an iPhone user and you're purchasing things, there's a good chance that the transaction is actually going through a Power System, or when you're making an online purchase or buying a home, somewhere there's probably a Power System server somewhere in the middle of that whole transaction processing. So it's a very, very key part of many of the global companies, and that's the other thing, is you'll find it across multiple segments, so government, retail, healthcare, finance, and across the entire globe. Some of the key workloads as well, just to there's things like Oracle, DB2, SAP HANA, Epic, so on and so forth. So a very wide range of applications that you're going to find running on the platform. From an operating system perspective, you see that it's running AIX, Linux, as well as IBM I. So very broad range of operating systems that run on top of these computers. Another kind of a fun factoid, if you will, about Power is that it's actually used in 3 of the top 10 world supercomputers. So, again, very, very critical in terms of, processing the most sensitive applications that you would find in the business, but also used in high performance computing environments as well. So again, for those of you that are maybe new to the Power platform, that's a quick, really, crash course in, what these systems are and what they're used for out in the industry. So with that, Paul, next slide. So one of the things that we've been hearing and why we were so excited to enable the Red Hat Ansible platform for Power Systems was, we had been talking and surveying and working with our clients, and we're finding more and more and more, I mean, especially in these days, people are spending a lot of time, precious administrative time, performing sometimes boilerplate tasks and doing the same things over and over using manual processes. maybe those are things like how are people updating or patching systems, making sure they're at the latest compliance levels. How are people provisioning new partitions, or how are people ensuring that the right security protocols are installed and things are up to date. So there's all of these different scenarios that we're hearing time and time again, where folks are spending time doing these very repetitive tasks, and people, that time that people are spent doing that is less time they can be doing other things valuable to the business. And so this whole notion of people are really thirsting for automation, and of course that's where Red Hat Ansible positions really, really well, and plays very well to helping tackle some of those challenges. And especially when you look at our AIX and IBM community, I mean, these skills are a premium. And what we're really looking to do is give back the gift of time. So that's why we're so excited to embrace on this journey around Ansible, is to really let people be more productive. And I think if we just look at what's going on in the world today, I think that now more so than ever, we have to look at how can we do more with less. And so that's where we're really excited to be here and kind of giving you some insight as to how Ansible can help you automate these things that potentially people were spending days, weeks, or even sometimes months doing by hand. Next slide, please, Paul. So what we've done is, as I've sort of alluded to earlier, is have enabled the Ansible platform for Power Systems. And what we were really looking to do when we started out on this journey was enable consistent automation across AIX and IBM, and even Linux on Power as well. And when we talk about consistent management, we know many of you are probably even using Ansible on your x86 environments today, and we want to have this capability where Power can just seamlessly integrate with your existing enterprise automation strategy. So I think having that consistent approach across the data center, where you don't have to have a unique set of skills to automate across the different compute platforms, is a big benefit. And we've heard that time and time again as we've been out talking with our customers. The other thing is that we've also been listening to our clients in the sense that, and I sort of alluded to this a moment ago, AIX and IBM skills are a premium, and with that premium, sometimes it can be hard to find. And so what we're looking to do, as well as by bringing some more of these industry standard technologies like Ansible and enabling these things for the Power platform, that also makes the platforms more easily adoptable, if you will, or people can sort of ease their way into the management of this, and it makes them more approachable. So that's a really huge benefit that we've gotten a lot of positive feedback as we've been working with early adopters of Ansible across Power Systems. A couple of other key points here. The way that this has come together, and as you'll see here, especially as we get into some of the demonstrations and as Paul is talking through this, this is nothing we've done here actually really changed. There was no changes to the Ansible engine or Tower or these things. All of those components just work business as usual like they do today. We've actually developed a set of Power modules that will work against AIX and IBM, and so all of the Power specific things are done within those modules. So in other words, again, it kind of goes back to that seamless integration point I was alluding to earlier. And then last but certainly not least here, as we were embarking on this journey, we've started out really majoring on a lot of the automation around operating system administration. We've also been doing some work as well to make sure that people can orchestrate things like cloud provisioning and other sorts of operations. So those are things as you're sort of looking at your automation strategy. Again, we're seeing that initial, I'll say, gravity around doing the operating system management tasks, but that will also lead into this broader set of scenarios as well, again, such as public or private cloud provisioning, so on and so forth. Next slide. So from a high-level deployment model, and for those of you that are familiar with Ansible, I'm sure many of you probably are, the great news is, as I mentioned before, the architecture is identical. So if you look from left to right, you see you've got Tower, which is of course going to be your graphical user interface to basically be able to take Red Hat Ansible and manage it at scale. So you're going to have the nice graphical interface across your whole Ansible estate. And then of course you have the Ansible engine component, which is what's going to be responsible for kicking off and running the playbooks and so on and so forth. And then where we've injected Power Systems, as you can see, is on the far right. So from an endpoint perspective, we now have full commercial support for AIX and IBM I. And in fact, even our friends in IBM Z for the mainframe business have enabled ZOS as well. So now you can get full subscription support for AIX and IBM I platforms out on the Power Compute architecture. And then everything to the left of the endpoints remains the same. So you can take your existing deployment of Tower and seamlessly hook in your IBM Power Systems into that platform. So again, it just makes it really nice and really easy to take your Power platform and hook it into your existing estate for those of you that are already Ansible users. And for those of you that are not, this is actually super easy to get started with. And we're going to have a couple of demos here that Paul's going to run through, and you'll see just how easy it is to approach. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Paul to sort of talk us through a little bit about some of the certified content that we have available in the use cases, and then get into a demo. So Paul, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Joe. Hi, everyone. Welcome again. So what I want to do right now, Joe talked us through some of the the history behind Power Systems activity and how best to leverage some of the automation tools and utilities through Ansible and Red Hat. What I'm going to do is talk to you about some of the content that's available for you from the Red Hat Ansible Certified Content for Power Systems. That will include AIX and IBM I, but also I'd like to mention that in the very near future, we'll have support for BIOS as well. So if you're looking for something along those lines, that would be available as well. Not to spend too much on this chart, but just to speak to some of the highlights as to what's here. Let me adjust the sharing. Okay. So as Joe mentioned, some of the common tasks that we want to automate, some of those things have been done by way of what I would call endpoint management, where we've made modules that allow you to do some of the common administrative tasks, such as querying for patches. And then, once you find those patches that are necessary, whether those be interim fixes or published LPPs and TL content, we're now able to also download that content, again, whether they be interim fixes or TLs. And when you have that system configured, we're now able to take those same patches and now do deployments. Those deployments can be done in two ways, actually. We have endpoint management, where it's the one-to-one relationship where you can patch a system using Ansible, having those endpoints be connected, and then have modules run directly on those endpoints. But we also have what we call centralized management in the AIX form. And what that allows us is to point to a server that can then be responsible for managing the other systems. One of the reasons why you may find users wanting to do that is because they may not have an environment where all endpoints can be connected to Ansible, whether that be because of SSH or just simply not having Python on those systems. So the centralized management would allow you to connect to a single server, have that server then run the management of those other systems using some of our more common connections, such as we have a NIM service provider that allows us for centralized management via a separate protocol. Won't get into too many details there. I don't want to get too deep, but just to let you know that we have endpoint management for modules, and we also have centralized management where you can connect to one via endpoint, and then from that single endpoint, you can manage multiple systems. All the content we have is certified. So all the content that I'm speaking of today, and content going forward for that matter, is certified and will be certified. IBM supports all of our modules and all of the roles that we are shipping. We do have example playbooks as well. Those playbooks are available from our GitHub repository. Those playbooks are also available in Galaxy as well for some of the content, and those playbooks provide, real quick how-to type of examples. They don't go into great detail, but we do have a few nice playbooks that can describe how, as an ISV, let's say, for instance, I want to deploy an application, get it configured on the system. That application deployment may include several different actions in that stack, such as creating large file systems, managing the volumes in a system, even installing and configuring additional users, SSH keys, all that good stuff. So I mentioned about our content. Yes, it is certified. It is available at Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform. With subscription, you will have service and support from AIX, IBM, and for that matter, all of the other Power Systems collections that are to come. How that information and content is delivered, it's in twofold. One, of course, we have our GitHub automation platform. And with GitHub, what we're doing there is, that's where we're going to store all of our content. So everything that you'll see, we do source control via GitHub. That is a public IBM GitHub site. At that public IBM GitHub site, you'll notice there are several collections available. Today, we're speaking of 2, but there are 2 additional ones as well to follow. So there are actually 4 you can find from GitHub. And very soon, those will all be a part of the certified content. Until that certification is completed, all content can be discovered and downloaded through Galaxy. So you can use your well-known Galaxy install options. That can be by way of manual download and copy to your systems, the collections themselves, and then move installations. Or you can query and download the installations using Ansible Galaxy command. Once you've installed all of that content, feel free to look around. You'll see modules that are in place for things such as SQL activity, where you can do scripting, execute and query on IBM. You'll also find content in place, as I mentioned, for the patching. So you'll have IBM as well as AIX patching made available to you. If you're looking to understand what all that content entails, well, that's where you can check 2 places, actually. From the Galaxy side of house, the easiest way to do that is to have a look at any of the collection pages. From those collection pages, you'll be able to select the content tab. And from the content tab, what we're doing here is we're describing all of the modules, roles, any plugins that the collections deliver, brief descriptions, but in addition to those brief descriptions, you can have more detailed information if you were to then go to our documentation sites. One of the good things and one of the important things I should mention here is that since it's an open community, since we have content in GitHub, that content may expand more than what's currently certified. So it's good to take a look at the content tab to see what's actually in your collection. Because if you're just going off of documentation, well, that documentation may include all materials that are in GitHub as well. So you may find that certain modules aren't present in the release that's being displayed or shown through Galaxy or Automation Hub. So take a look at the content tab and see what's in your current collection. We do deliver beta releases as well. We currently have a beta release out for Power BIOS. That beta release is over in Galaxy. We're going to hold off and put the supported official content over into Automation Hub very soon. At that same time, we'll have an update to our AIX and IBM collections. So be on the lookout for that. That should happen actually over the next couple of weeks. I can go ahead and give you that bit of information. And when you look over in Automation Hub, when you have a look at our content, you will notice that, we've been quite busy over the last 3 months. We've made it our mission actually to stay, aligned with what our customers require and also use cases that we think are most important for our customers. And so over in Automation Hub, if you review the documentation and contents tab directly, in the platform, you will notice we've spent a lot of time on patching. And that's because patching was something that I think it gives you a huge bang for your buck. After day 0, that day 1 and beyond activity is always going to be around, systems management. And some of the important details of systems management is making sure systems are proper, operating at optimal performance, but then also making sure that you stay current on any of your patches or compliance requirements. One of the things that I should also point out is, in order to use Ansible, there are a couple of minor requirements, those 2 being unique connectivity, which can be done by way of SSH, but then you also need to have Python on your system if you're going to have endpoint management. Python, can be installed on your AIX system and also on your IBM system. But one of the requirements we've heard from customers is that having Python installed on AIX isn't as simple as going to look for licensed product information. They have to go and retrieve the open source software. And so then you get into a scenario where you have this dependency that needs to be fulfilled before you can manage the system. So we've worked on some Bootstrap mechanisms that actually allows your Ansible control machine the ability to download the packages that you'll need, push those over to your AIX systems, and then get those systems installed with Yum as well as Python prior to running any of your endpoint modules. And I'll show you a demonstration on that. So let's see, where are we with time? Okay. So what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about some of the demos and where some of these videos live. And then I'll give you a quick, 2 to 3 minute video that shows how you would be able to do some orchestration around deploying Apache and configuring the system as a Yum server. So our power trailer on the left-hand side, this is normally how we demonstrate and present this information. We have demo videos that are in two forms. We have the power trailer that gives you it's more like a tickler. It shows you and it describes real quickly some of the things that you can now do with Ansible and Power Systems. That trailer, it's about a minute or so. Have a look at that. But then after that trailer, you'll see that there are a few demos around AIX and IBM where we demonstrate using Tower. And with using Tower, we show how you can do a couple of things. You can use products that do provisioning, where you do the initial install of your system, and those provisioning products, you can download collections to do that that activity for you. But after doing that activity, the next thing is, what do I do with these systems when they're running? And so that's where the day 2 activity comes in that I talked about, where you want to install additional software. That software could be application, or it could just be system software that you haven't configured on your system yet. And again, that's whether it's IBM or AIX. If you need to manage or configure your systems, we show in the video how to make use of the system software applications to do that. But then also we show, after you've done that, okay, great, now how do I get some productivity out of the system? That's where we show you can install open source applications, such as open source databases, or you can install proprietary applications as well, things such as DB2, configuring the system as a patch server. You can define your system to do management of resources. All those great things are in our videos. So have a look at that. What I'd like to do now is, let's take this. Let me stop presenting for 1 second. So that I can show you a real quick video on bootstrapping. Before I get into the common use cases, I won't spend a lot of time on those. Just know that those use cases are intended to cover most of the things that we see customers doing that are repeatable, and processes that require a set of skills that may not be currently available on their teams, or skills that they would like to make widely available to users who aren't familiar with the environments. Meaning, if I had a point and click activity where I could say, do it now, as opposed to having to know how to do it, we think that that's beneficial. So that's how we identify our use cases for administrative tasks. We have been listening to customers, and based on their feedback, we are continuing to fine tune. So that's in no way set in stone. But as I had mentioned, you have that chicken and egg scenario. Here's an example of how, using our collection, you're able to do some of the Bootstrap activity around getting Yum and then Python installed on your system. So I'll let this run, and then we'll talk a bit about what you're seeing. And I apologize if this is hard to view. But what it's really showing you here is that we're running a playbook, and that playbook is actually saying, hey, I just want you to bootstrap the system and then install a piece of software. So during that bootstrap process, what's happening here is we're checking to see if the system already has Python installed. If it does not, what we do is we use the Ansible control machine to discover where are packages required to configure Python in AIX. Once it discovers those packages, it's able to download those to the control machine and then transfer those over using a raw module. Once it's transferred to the system, then what we're able to do is restore the package. So that restoration puts Python on the system. And after restoration, we configure Yum. After doing those things, we remove all things that were copied to the system. So we like to clean up, good housekeeping. Once we've cleaned up the system, it's now ready, and it's Ansible ready, so to speak. So then we give control back to the control node, and then you can run additional tasks for your real place. So that's an example of how we've pointed to a system. We've discovered the system does not have Python, therefore we're able to bootstrap it with Python. So let's take this. So now that you're able to bootstrap the system, how can I go about using this as part of a workflow? So in this video, what we're going to show you is a user may want to install a Yum repository. Installing a Yum repository, there's quite a bit activity involved with that. You have to first identify, is there a volume that can store a large file system to hold all of my RPMs locally on that system? If there is not, then you have to define that. So we have to identify the necessary physical volume, define a volume group, create a file system, large file enabled, download all of the RPMs that you'd like to host. After downloading those RPMs, configure that system as a local repo. Then after you've done that, how do you host? So that's where you'd have to install a database. Installing that database, in addition to that, installing an HTTP server that can respond to requests, all those things, as you can imagine, that could take several hours. So what we're going to show you in this video is the amount of tasks required from an administrator are quite small when using things such as Ansible Tower and some of our certified content. So you see here I have identified some inventory. It's stored in AIX Cloud VMs. That inventory right now only contains a couple machines that need to be configured as Yum repo servers. So pointing to that inventory, I'm able to discover, do they have AIX? If not, it will do the bootstrap. As you can see right here, bootstrapping was not required for those two machines. So now it's going to decide, okay, what needs to happen next? Do I need to install an Apache HTTP server? Yes, I do. So since Yum has been bootstrapped to the system, I'm able to download the Apache server RPM, configure that. Then after doing so, now I want to host RPMs as a local repo. So I can use playbook modules to create a file system. After creating that large file system, mounting, expanding space for file systems that are going to be used. And once doing that, we're able to then install the Yum utility packages to do local repo and create repo. After we've done that, we're able to sync the data from the external server to the local machine. This requires us to be able to connect to a Yum server, find out what's in its cache, and then ask it to transfer those files to us. Once transferring those files, we're able to update our own local database to show that those files are now able to be hosted. After doing that, we're then able to configure HTTP server to host the document loop. All of this, as I mentioned, this would take you, a couple of hours to do on your own. But in this video, we've condensed the time to fit, a 3-minute frame. But if you look to the right-hand side for each one of the tasks that are being run in this job, you'll notice that this has only taken us 15 minutes so far of activity in Yum. And that's really because, the automation allows us to really streamline the tasks that are required. Right now, as far as copying those RPMs to the system, there are only a handful that we're copying in this demonstration. But if you wanted to copy and replicate an entire Yum repo, it would take roughly about an hour and a half if you wanted to replicate all of the images that are being hosted from our AIX toolbox. But with just a handful, you'll notice that in 15 minutes we did this. This was just a quick point and click, walk away, get a cup of coffee, come back, and your system's ready. I'm sure you might have questions on some of those tasks, so feel free to ask them very shortly. And then we get to the Q&A section. Let's finish up here though. All right. So Oops. I think it pressed too far. One more. Okay. So I had talked about some of those common tasks. Let me now talk to you a little bit about how those things are being managed. So right now what we're doing is, for each one of the use cases you see listed here, there are a handful of modules. It may not be a one-to-one relationship between a module, for instance, file system management. We may do things to manage the logical volumes, as well as have modules that change file system size or perform mounts and activity of that nature. So there might be multiple modules associated with the use case. All that to say, let's assume we were talking about the file system management, as I mentioned. There are about 5 modules that we have out there. Those 5 modules may satisfy a particular use case, meaning we may not have all of the options immediately at hand. So you'd want to take a look at the content, whether that's through the automation platform, looking at the documentation there, or using the content tab. And then from there, referring to our external docs. Look at those and see which attributes are we currently supporting. That attribute list may grow. Initially, the list will be targeted towards whatever we're doing to satisfy a particular use case or to satisfy a requirement that a customer may have for an existing activity that they're trying to require support for. What we're doing as far as how often we update, on a monthly basis, we're looking to provide cumulative patches, and we'll promote those patches through Galaxy and Automation Hub. If there aren't any patches currently required for that month of service, then we'll probably not be pushing additional information to Automation Hub. Instead, we'll keep that information over in our Git repos. And so from a community standpoint, those things will continue to grow. And then after each month, if there's not any service, but there's a new major minor, we may push that to Galaxy. And depending on if there's content in there that's been requested by customers, then you may see it promoted to Automation Hub. But on a quarterly basis, we're looking to have minor updates. So that's why I mentioned very soon you'll see an update for the end of this quarter, the third quarter. So very soon you'll see updates for versions 1.1 of our AIX collection, our IBM collection, and there will be a sister collection for VIOS that will align with the same major minor release. So it'll show 1.1 for VIOS, but that's actually the official release for our VIOS collection. And in that VIOS collection, we'll have things such as patching the VIOS, doing some very specific health check type of scenarios before performing updates to your BIOS. You can perform rolling updates. So that's really exciting. What that means is we'll do health check to see if I want to perform a rolling update for 2 BIOSes, let's say that are managing virtualization for some systems. Are they redundant? Can one BIOS be brought down while the second is managing the environment? How do I do that? We check to make sure virtual adapters and hosts are all aligned, and if so, we'll bring down one BIOS, manage and update it. If everything's proper, we'll bring them back online and then bring down the second. That way, all of your systems are still active. They are not going to have any type of downtime being incurred because of this, but it will allow you to have a management and migration path going forward without having to bring down systems. For DevOps, there's quite a bit of work there. For IBM, have a look at the collection. There's a lot of work in there for doing things like host services, and also installing licensed products from save files is present. Other DevOps activity is around submitting jobs and query and promoting new software to the system. For cloud operations, I'm not sure if Joe mentioned this before, but we do have quite a bit of activity in that space, and so please have a look because we have some great provisioning steps and actions that you can perform with Terraform and CAM, and using some of the OpenStack modules, you're able to truly provision a cloud system, and after provisioning that cloud system, you're able to manage it using all of our collections that you see here. So I've spoken a bit on this. Let's try and get to some Q&A. So what's next? These links are live links. So assuming this information is presented to you, if not, have a look at our websites, and the same links are present, and that's on our documentation. That's over in, Automation Hub, actually. If you look over at the infrastructure page for Power Systems, you'll see some of these same links. If you're outside of the automation platform and you're looking at Galaxy, the same links are available as part of the READMEs for the collections, so have a look there. And if you're in our GitHub SCM space, you can find the same information presented to you as well. Okay, so at this point, I believe we have about 10 or so minutes. So what questions do we have? Elle, are people able to unmute and speak freely, or how should we handle questions?
If you go to the question box, you'll see all the questions that have been submitted. So if you just want to read out which question you're answering and then provide an answer, that would be great.
Okay. This presentation materials, yes. Ansible modules like Linux. Okay, so is there a site you can go to get Ansible modules like Linux? If you're asking about just installing for Power Linux, the great thing is that out of the box, the same modules you're using today for Linux support and Ansible probably work on Power as well. I can't think of many scenarios, or even a handful actually, where Linux modules have not worked on Power Linux, but I'll leave it for others to answer as well. Joe, do you happen to know if there's a specific place where customers should go to get Power Linux modules?
No, that's a great question. I think in general, most of the Linux modules, in fact, would just work. I mean, since Linux on Power really is Linux. I mean, there might be a few exceptions here and there, but in fact, just as a data point, I mean, we've run a lot of the CI against Linux on Power, and again, to your point, Paul, most of those modules just work out of the box.
Okay. Ansible module for HMC. The question is, do we have Ansible modules for HMC and BIOS and creating VIOC, etc.? I'm not sure if that, I think that's virtual clients. I'm not sure what the VIOC is, but to answer this question, yes, during the presentation I had mentioned that we have 2 existing collections, but there are 2 additional collections that are forthcoming. One collection is for Power BIOS, and that collection will be available over the next couple of weeks at the same time as we promote the new major minor versions for AIX and IBM. For HMC, we're working on content now. That content is tentative. It may be out in time to align with the other 3 collections that I have mentioned, but for now, that collection will probably reside in Galaxy as opposed to pushing it as certified. One of the reasons is because we want to get some user feedback. We haven't had as much feedback on that collection, so making sure that we're doing the right thing for our customers. We'd like to have maybe some use cases where customers do a study with us, come back and tell us if the collections work as expected, or if there are some missing materials. But to answer that question, yes, we do have Ansible modules for HMC and BIOS, and they will be in collection form. And you can retrieve them from our GitHub SCM until promoted to Galaxy in the very near future, and then to automation platform. Question is, do I have to set up a Linux LPAR to use this on my IBM I? Set up Linux LPAR, I think you're asking about the control nodes. So setting up a control node, if you want support, the answer there, I believe, is that yes, you must be running this on Linux. But if you're looking to run an Ansible control node and you're not looking for support, I have installed, a Ansible control node package on AIX. I'm not sure if that helps you, but I don't know of one that can install on Linux. If you're just managing the endpoint, there's no true setup required from a separate LPAR. Endpoint modules, of course, you can install those on the control node and they'll copy down to the IBM I system as it's managed.
And just a quick logistics question. So, Paul, some of these questions as well, I think, have also been answered, or have been posted out there. I just want to be sure that folks can see some of those answers as well that we've posted.
Okay, let me try and go a little bit faster. Let me see if there's something. When did AIX modules come into existence? They've been in existence for a while now, actually. Some mostly supported by community, but certified content, we started making that available at the end of first quarter, actually.
Just as an FYI, a lot of these questions have been answered. So if you click on show, uncheck the thing that says showed answered questions, we can focus.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
One of the other ones that I saw that popped in that's a new one is there was a great question about, are there any consultants or experts in Europe? And the question the answer is absolutely. So there's a team that we've got. I mean, there's both Red Hat as well as IBM consultants that can help on advising on some of these technologies. So there's some links that are provided in the presentation where people can go to get some more information. There will be pointers to some of that. So we've got folks across the globe. So regardless of which region you're in, you can have access to consulting services and that can work with you to kind of help you get started on your Ansible automation journey on Power Systems.
Okay, real quick question. This is a good one here. This is a good question here about using BIOS, and if using Ansible with BIOS. Is it supported by IBM? Yes, it is supported. If you're asking because of the requirement for Python, Python is still required to use BIOS. We are working on an actual support statement around Python in general, but specifically for Ansible, Python will be supported. If you have questions about installation of Python on your BIOS, you can use the Bootstrap method that I just mentioned. Otherwise, administrating your BIOS is as easy as defining an Ansible user for BIOS, and then using that for setting the roles required to do all of the modules. What I mean by that is if you use the make role command on BIOS, you can define all the administrative roles required for your Ansible user. So you don't have to give it privilege escalation or move it to root. Go ahead, Joe, you had a statement.
Oh, yeah, no, I was just going to say there was another question. Can we use Linux on Power for the control node? So from an officially, officially supported perspective, you would need to run the control node on x86. So the things that you have the certified content available for from an enterprise support perspective is really on the AIX and IBM endpoints, and then you would run your tower and or engine would be running on x86 Linux.
Yeah, there was another question about running Ansible without a control node. I'm not really sure how that would help you with the centralized or the scale management. You would want to have a control node. In fact, you would need a control node for Tower to run properly. That's been answered. Python versions 2.7 or 3. The Bootstrap will install 2.7. There will be an option very soon for installing Python 3, but that Python 3 installation will work very similar to where we uncompress an image that has everything you need. But in addition to that Python 3 support, we're holding off on adding that until we have DNF. We should have DNF as an install option very soon. And then that will use Python 3, and then you would no longer require Yum. So if you're hesitant about using 2.7, that also means you can't use Yum. So when we have DNF available, we'll change our Bootstrap option to give you the option of 2 or 3. When installing 3, it will only install DNF and it will not install Yum. Separate module certificate out excellent.
There was another great question from a pricing perspective. So it's the great news there is that it's priced based on the number of managed endpoints, which is just consistent with how pricing is for x86. So it's the same model you have, and those subscriptions can be The endpoints can be used however you see fit. So you can use them across AIX, IBM as well as your existing estate. So it just seamlessly integrates with the broader Red Hat Ansible subscription process.
There's a question about, can you install Ansible Tower on AIX and trigger playbooks from an AIX node? You'll want to stick with the supported method of doing this, and that would be to have Tower running on a supported version of Linux. I have not even tried to see if Tower even works for an AIX control node. So I can't really give you a specific answer there as far as capability, but my statement would be stick with the supported method and use Tower with a version of Linux that is supported.
There was another good question. Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Real fast, can HMC code version updates be automated in Ansible? Yes, that is what our initial collection that we're coming out with over the next couple of weeks, that's what it will address. How to do version updates via Ansible playbook activity, and we'll have modules that help do that.
Yeah, there was another great question that came in about, using Ansible Engine. Can I schedule playbooks, or do I need to use Tower? So, Tower has, of course, the automated capabilities baked into the product. If you're not using Tower, of course, you could do something, primitive, like, set up an automated cron job or something to that effect. So there are some ways that you could schedule the execution of playbooks as well.
Okay, I believe I've gone through quite a few of these. I apologize if I haven't gotten to each one of the questions. Some of them I have skipped because I believe we discussed as part of the presentation, whether on my end or on Joe's. But feel free to reach back out, and we can have follow-up or an extended discussion. That's all I have. It's about 8 minutes until we're top of the hour, so I believe we should be wrapping up. If there are any additional questions that you would like to answer, Joe, I'm just reading a little bit. Is there anything else that you would like to speak on, Joe, before I turn it back over?
No, I thought this has been a great session. I did see one other, good question that came in just about, what's some of the key use cases for Ansible for IBM. I mean, in fact, I would answer this in a OS agnostic way. So I think it's broad in the sense that, Ansible as an overall platform, kind of going back to what we talked about as the overarching theme, it's really all about, automating anything. I mean, in the sense that if you find people in your organization that are doing a task, more than one time, you should be asking yourself, can I automate this, right? Can I make this more reliable, more repeatable? So I think if you look at the IBM platform and you look at what you're doing from a day-to-day perspective, from an administration standpoint, from a software patch perspective, from a application deployment perspective, all of those things are good candidates that could be automated. And so, like I said, I think that all of those same things that you would do on x86 or AIX or IBM, I think that's a kind of a globally applicable answer. And specifically within the IBM modules, and there was an earlier question where we made a reference to all of the IBM modules as well, and there are several of them available. I think you'll find that the modules that are currently out there in the in the content and automation hub, as well as the modules that continue to come, I think there's a huge opportunity or a big surface area for things that you could look at automating on your IBM platform.
Yep, and just real quick on that, there's a lot of the modules over in IBM right now. They allow you to do job scheduling. Of course, you can do querying and management of database. They have the restoration of libraries, saving of libraries. As I had mentioned before, a lot of this will center around patching, but then it extends to some of the day-to-day activity. So it's more of the common administrative tasks, but then there's also additional tasks as well, like uninstalling products, user and group management. You can also do licensed products, saving of files. It's quite a bit.
Calling programs, pace applications, native applications. Yeah, creating save files, all of those sorts of things that an IBM I admin would do, day in and day out.
Yep. Okay, so I think we are done. So I'll hand it back over to you, El. Thank you, everyone, so much, and I really appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you. As I mentioned, you will be getting a follow-up email with this recording as well as the slide deck. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out, but thank you again for joining, and thank you to our partners over at IBM for presenting. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.